The Midnight Hitchhiker. Jake had been a long-haul trucker for over a decade, crisscrossing the country on countless late-night runs. He loved the solitude of the open road, the hum of the engine, and the thrill of watching the miles slip away under his tires. But there was one stretch of highway he dreaded: the old Route 66 in Arizona. It was an isolated, desolate road, surrounded by nothing but desert and the occasional cluster of rundown buildings. There were stories among truckers, whispered tales of strange occurrences on that lonely stretch of asphalt, but Jake had always dismissed them as just that, stories. One particularly dark night, Jake found himself driving along that very road. He was hauling a load of freight across the state, with miles to go before he could stop. The desert was pitch black, the only light coming from his headlights and the faint glow of the stars above. The radio crackled with static, and Jake found himself humming to break the eerie silence. As he rounded a bend in the road, something caught his eye: a figure standing by the side of the highway, just barely visible in the dim light. It was a man, his thumb extended in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. Jake hesitated. He knew better than to pick up strangers, especially in the middle of the night on a deserted road. But something about the man seemed desperate, and against his better judgment, Jake slowed down and pulled over. The hitchhiker approached the truck, his face hidden in the shadows. Jake rolled down the window slightly, enough to speak but not enough to let the man inside. "Need a lift?" Jake asked. The hitchhiker nodded, his movements slow and deliberate. "Thanks," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "Been out here a long time." Jake unlocked the passenger door, and the man climbed in, his presence filling the cab with an unsettling chill. Jake glanced at him, trying to get a better look, but the man kept his face turned away, staring out the window. "Where you headed?" Jake asked, trying to ease the tension. "Just up the road," the hitchhiker replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not far." Jake nodded and started the truck moving again, the engine's rumble the only sound in the silence. As they drove, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hitchhiker was too quiet, too still, and the air in the cab felt heavy, almost oppressive. After a few minutes, Jake glanced over at the hitchhiker again. But this time, the man was staring straight at him. Jake's heart skipped a beat. The hitchhiker's eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to bore into his soul. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his lips were cracked and dry. But it was his expression that terrified Jake the most: a twisted smile that didn't reach his eyes, a grin that spoke of malice and something far worse. Jake felt a surge of panic. He needed to get this man out of his truck. But they were in the middle of nowhere, and there was no place to stop. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing for a solution. Then, without warning, the hitchhiker spoke again. "You know what they say about this road, don't you?" His voice was low and raspy, like the sound of gravel being crushed underfoot. Jake shook his head, too scared to speak. "They say it's cursed," the hitchhiker continued. "They say people disappear out here, never to be seen again. Maybe it's true, maybe it's just stories. But one thing's for sure, you shouldn't be out here alone." Jake's blood ran cold. He could feel the man's eyes on him, that unnerving smile still plastered on his face. He needed to get away, needed to get off this road, but the hitchhiker's presence was paralyzing. Suddenly, the truck's engine sputtered and died. The lights flickered and the cab was plunged into darkness. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he frantically tried to restart the engine, but it was no use. The truck was dead, and they were stranded in the middle of the desert. The hitchhiker's grin widened and he leaned closer to Jake. "Looks like we're stuck here," he whispered. Jake could feel the man's cold breath on his skin, and terror surged through him. He fumbled for the door handle, desperate to escape, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if it were locked from the outside, trapping him inside with this nightmare. The hitchhiker chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent shivers down Jake's spine. "Don't worry," he said. "You won't be alone for long." Just as Jake was about to scream, the truck's lights flickered back on, and the engine roared to life. The door suddenly unlocked, and Jake didn't hesitate. He threw it open and leaped out of the cab, stumbling onto the highway. But when he turned to look back, the hitchhiker was gone. The passenger seat was empty, as if the man had never been there at all. Jake scrambled back into the truck and sped off down the road, his hands shaking on the wheel. He didn't stop until he reached the nearest town, where he finally pulled over, his heart still racing. He never drove that stretch of highway again, and he never picked up another hitchhiker. But the memory of that night haunted him, a constant reminder that some roads should never be traveled alone. The haunting at Deadman's Curve. Travis was a seasoned trucker, known for his calm demeanor and ability to handle the toughest routes. He had driven through some of the most treacherous roads in the country, but there was one route that he always tried to avoid: Deadman's Curve. The road was infamous among truckers for its sharp turns, steep cliffs, and the number of accidents that had occurred there over the years. But what made it truly terrifying were the stories. Tales of ghostly apparitions, phantom vehicles, and eerie voices that echoed through the night. Most dismissed them as urban legends, but those who had driven the route knew better. One night, Travis found himself with no choice but to take Deadman's Curve. He was running late on a delivery, and the alternative route would have added hours to his journey. He tried to push the stories from his mind as he approached the winding road, but a sense of unease settled over him. The night was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. Travis's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow, twisting road ahead. He gripped the steering wheel tightly as he navigated the first few turns, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. The road was eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the truck's frame. As he approached the first sharp bend, Travis noticed something strange: a dense fog that seemed to appear out of nowhere, rolling in from the cliffs and blanketing the road in a thick, impenetrable mist. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and Travis slowed the truck to a crawl, squinting through the windshield to see the road ahead. Just as he rounded the bend, he saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, barely visible through the fog. Travis's heart skipped a beat as he slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt just inches from the figure. He could see it more clearly now: a woman dressed in a long, white gown, her hair flowing around her like a veil. She was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were wide with fear. Travis sat frozen in his seat, his mind racing. He had heard the stories, but seeing it with his own eyes was something else entirely. The woman's mouth moved as if she were speaking, but no sound came out. She lifted her arm, pointing down the road, her expression pleading. Travis felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what to do. Should he follow her? Should he turn back? But before he could make a decision, the woman began to walk away, her figure slowly disappearing into the fog. Unable to resist, Travis put the truck back in gear and followed, his hands trembling on the wheel. The road grew narrower and more treacherous as he followed the ghostly figure. The fog seemed to grow thicker with each passing moment, swallowing the world around him. The woman led him through a series of sharp turns, each one more dangerous than the last. Travis's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his heart pounding in his chest. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman was gone. The fog began to lift, revealing the road ahead. But what Travis saw next made his blood run cold. The road ended abruptly at the edge of a steep cliff, a drop that would have sent him and his truck plunging into the abyss below. He slammed on the brakes again, stopping just in time. Shaken, Travis sat in silence, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. He had been seconds away from driving off the cliff, but the ghostly woman had led him to safety. But who was she? And why had she helped him? As he sat there, the fog continued to lift, revealing the treacherous road in its entirety. Travis realized that the woman had guided him through the most dangerous part of Deadman's Curve, a section of the road that had claimed countless lives over the years. He had heard stories of truckers who had lost control on that very stretch, their vehicles plummeting over the edge to their doom. Travis knew then that the woman was one of them, a spirit trapped on the road, doomed to relive her final moments over and over again. But why had she appeared to him? Was she trying to warn him, or was she simply seeking help that he could never provide? With a heavy heart, Travis started the truck again and carefully made his way off the cursed road. He didn't stop until he reached the safety of a truck stop miles away. That night, as he sat in the dimly lit diner, sipping his coffee, the events of the evening replayed in his mind. He never drove Deadman's Curve again, and whenever he heard other truckers talk about it, he would simply nod and listen. He knew the stories were true. He had seen the ghostly figure with his own eyes. And every time he passed through Arizona, he couldn't help but wonder if the woman was still out there, guiding lost souls through the deadly curve, hoping that one day someone might help her find peace.